I saw people neglecting their homes. I saw people neglecting themselves. I saw people just, and this is supposed to be our blessed hope. Everything that I saw pointed to a sense of hopelessness. We wanted to have lives. We didn't want to get whisked away from the planet. We didn't want the things that we were supposed to want because it was so framed in fear that they kind of beat themselves at their own game with this one. Some of these statements that were made were very, very black and white. And even as I read them now, I sit here wondering how they intended to get out of it when these things didn't happen. It's been 2,000 years. Where is he? Let me make this abundantly crystal clear. Jesus is never coming back.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shell, and it's time to get unbound.
Now, I swear this wasn't on purpose either. But we're about to deliver 2 full-length Christians behaving badly segments, like back to back here, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we pretty much are, because the Rapture and end times hysteria that churned up in the 80s was just in lockstep with all of the satanic panic. For me anyway, it was a huge source of anxiety.
Yeah.
And a lot of looking over my shoulder and a lot of things that were just really unpleasant. And I thought that I was supposed to have a blessed hope. I never felt terribly hopeful, though.
No.
That was the thing.
Oh, no.
No one seemed to hope that the rapture would happen. In fact, most of my Christian friends were afraid of the rapture happening. Now, why would that be when you've got such a great reward waiting for you on the other side? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about the rapture hysteria that started in the 70s, really churned up in the 80s, and is still going on today. There are still all kinds of predictions about the return of Christ that just have no basis in anything. But these people still have books to sell, pamphlets to hand out, and voices to use. And, well, guess what? I've got my voice too, and we're going to talk a little bit tonight about just the crazy that went on when we were in the thick of this.
Oh, yeah.
And just some of the absurd things that we allowed ourselves to believe, and the absurd people that we decided to listen to about them. But before we get into that, I'm just going to briefly let you know one more time that we do have a Patreon account up, and we could absolutely use some help. $5 a month from a bunch of people is going to get a lot done. And you know me, I don't really like spending a lot of time asking for money, so this is probably going to be the shortest plug for this that I've done yet, mostly because I'm really, really excited about getting into the episode, but mostly because you already know that we're out there, but other people don't. So help us help them, and definitely help yourselves by talking about us and letting people know that this resource is out there if you think that it's something that can help them. So, quick string of plugs here: social media accounts, Unbound_Spider on Twitter, or Unbound Shell, all one word, on Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and on YouTube by simply plugging in Unbound Podcast Network in the search. And with that, I just want to get right into this. So yeah, between this and the Satanic Panic, these were the 2 big ones. And I think that they did the most damage to me personally. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the histories and origins of some of these stories. I don't think that most people understand there was no doctrine about a worldwide rapture prior to 1830, when John Darby decided that it would be a good thing to incorporate it into his ministry. Yeah. And for lack of a better way of describing this, he was the one who engineered this whole business of a worldwide rapture. And it worked. He had a whole end times program that he would put in front of people. And it was just like sending my grandmother to see that Revelation drama. Because people would see it, and they would get scared by it. And it's amazing how quickly a message can spread when it's spread with panic.
Yeah.
And this is something that the evangelicals have really capitalized on over the years. They know how to use the concept of panic to be able to get people to start thinking in lockstep with the way they want them to. Another thing that people, I don't think, quite understand is that the whole notion of end times prophecy and predictions about the return of Christ, these really, really predate anything about a rapture, because there are only a few fleeting verses that are taken very, very much out of context that go into this doctrine. They kind of paint a picture of what the end times is supposed to look like. They take several verses completely out of context to be able to make their point. And all of a sudden you have this doctrine that is adhered to and believed in by millions. And it really just, there are certain things about this religion I just don't understand how grown-up, rational thinking people could ever believe that anything like this was ever going to happen and continue believing it 2,000 years later. Now, I know that there's going to be one or two in the audience, so let me tell you, I know all there is to know about preterism. Preterism was my niche of choice toward the end of my stint with evangelical religion. And I found out in very, very short form that there's as much pride, arrogance, and narrow thinking among preterists as there is among evangelicals, because everybody wants to be right. And everybody wants this story to be true so badly that they just keep coming up with things to try to validate the things that they believe. Now, if you're a preterist, you believe that Jesus returned spiritually, not physically, and that was the plan all along, and it happened around 70 AD. And, you know, I adhered to this for a long time because there seemed to be some pretty sound proofs for it.
Right.
But at the same time, when you're using nothing but the Bible as your source of proof, then what good is it? So, you know, after a while, it just didn't make that much sense to me either. But the vast majority of people out there still believe that they are sitting there, or the vast majority of evangelical Christians, born-again Christians, believe that they're sitting there literally waiting for Jesus to physically return to earth and do all of the things that are talked about in the book of Revelation. And I'm not going to go through Revelation, you know, chapter by chapter. I might as another episode. But tonight, the simple fact of the matter is that so much of what happened between like 1970 and 1990 in particular had so little basis in even anything biblical that it's not even worth looking at Revelation. The one big one that I do remember is the whole thing around Chernobyl.
Oh yeah,
You remember that?
Yeah.
The verse in Revelation about wormwood, and it was a star that fell to earth and it poisoned a third of the waters and all of that.
Yes.
And there were a lot of people that thought that that was a prophecy about Chernobyl.
Right.
Because that is, I'd see the Ukrainian word, or it's one of the Cyrillic languages.
Yeah.
Where the word wormwood is translated Chernobyl.
Yes.
So people picked this up and ran with it.
Of course.
And of course, nothing else ever happened. And the things that were supposed to happen before hadn't happened, and all of this. It just, there's no solid foundation. It's just people looking at certain verses and even parts of verses, not even entire verses, just words taken out of context to make this thing seem real.
Right.
And that's a real problem, because when you're impressionable and you're being put in a spot where you're being afraid or scared into believing something, then it has a lot of power. And that messaging, it just travels like wildfire. And John Darby knew this, and that's why he did things the way that he did. This was in 1830, okay? It would be more than 100 years later before the real shockwaves started showing themselves out of this kind of doctrine, because what happened in 1970, Hal Lindsey put out a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, and he had a bunch after that.
Oh, yeah.
The follow-up to it in 1972 was Satan is Alive and Well on Planet Earth. So these two books had a profound impact on the way people thought about these things. And I can remember seeing commercials for these books asking these heavy theological questions that even at 7, 8 years old, I was listening. And later on, when I started getting more and more indoctrinated with the evangelical stuff, a lot of this started coming back.
Yeah.
So, even into the minds of children, like little children, this stuff sort of seeped in.
Yeah.
And later on, those really, really horrible thorny seeds that you guys like to talk about so much started cropping up in my head, and they start cropping up in a lot of people's heads. And what's the outcome of that? What are you reaping as a result of all that panic? Well, you start talking about the end coming, the end being near, and Jesus returning, and not just Jesus returning, but Jesus returning on specific days, specific times, and well, with all due respect, no one's been right yet. And the reason why no one has been right yet is very simple. It's because they're looking to a work of fiction to try and find truth and try and find something that's going to have a direct impact on their lives.
Well, I was just thinking that, you mentioned that The Late Great Planet Earth was published in 1970. And what happened almost like I think 2 years before that, Rosemary's Baby came out and The Exorcist came out. And before those two movies, people kind of didn't really have a belief in the devil or Satan. There were polls taken where now more people think that Satan is real. It's like a perfect storm.
It is. And, it works because the stories in those movies are no less plausible than anything that happens in their holy books.
Right.
So if it's supernatural, it's plausible as far as they're concerned. And at least 1 or 2 of the Mark IV movies came out before that, too, because I'm pretty sure Thief in the Night was late 60s, wasn't it?
Let me see. Nope, it's 1972.
72. Okay, so this was after The Late Great Planet Earth.
Yep.
You had those two. You had the Late Great Planet Earth, and then you had Satan is Alive and Well on Planet Earth. And that was 72. So the Mark IV stuff came out right on the heels of that.
You're right.
So all of these things are taking years to bubble up and percolate. And then when you get into the 1980s with the Satanic Panic, all of a sudden, I don't know about anybody else, but about mid 80s, 85, 86 is when I started seeing all of the end time stuff. Jesus, the choice of the last generation, that sort of thing. I saw a lot of that starting to crop up. But Hal Lindsey was the one that I really, really remembered well because number one, he was on TV and he had paid ads on TV.
Yes.
We're not even talking about TBN or anything like that.
No.
He bought ads during a lot of daytime programming.
Right.
And that was the age that I was at.
Yeah.
At that point. So yeah, really, really, really young. And I'm seeing this and it's getting in my head and the words are getting in my head. I had an advanced reading level when I was in school.
Same.
So in 3rd grade when, I had friends of mine that were still reading from the classroom readers. Mm-hmm. I was at the library pulling the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
And that was me in 3rd grade. Okay. So when you think about it from that perspective, a 5-year-old hearing something on TV like, will children who are not at the age of accountability be raptured? Mm-hmm. Yes. You know what? My 5-year-old mind literally sat there and asked, gee, am I a child below the age of accountability? And will I be raptured? And what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there were people in our neighborhood that were able to answer those questions and put more of those thoughts.
Yeah, right.
It was crazy. But getting into the 80s and when I first, quote unquote, gave my life to Jesus, that was 1985. And it started almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. I remember the worries about the rapture kind of came on the heels of all of my other worries because I was worried about backsliding because I was still very attracted to all of the witchy stuff. Also, nuclear war, which was a big thing in the Cold War and all that. We were all worried. Mm-hmm. And then you have the rapture to worry about, too. I was a very stressed kid. I was a very stressed teenager.
Yeah. And you worried about that.
We worried about all of this.
Why? Because we wanted to have lives. We
Yes.
wanted to have lives. I've always had a lot of female friends. Most of my friends in high school were girls. You know what the one thing that they were most concerned about was in terms of the rapture happening in 88 or whenever it was predicted to happen?
Yeah.
You know what their biggest fear was? This is going to happen before I get to have sex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's most.
We wanted to have lives. We didn't
Right.
want to get whisked away from the planet. We didn't want the things that we were supposed to want because it was so framed in fear that they kind of beat themselves at their own game with this one. No one was enthusiastic about this. No one that I knew was looking forward to it.
No.
Even if they believed it with all of their heart, soul, mind, and strength, they didn't really want it to happen. They didn't want what they were working on here to just be abruptly stopped.
Right.
Because in a way, it's a kind of death.
Yeah.
You know, and you're looking at eternal life. This is supposed to be a good thing. You're looking at the concept of eternal life and looking at it like a death sentence.
Right.
They really shot themselves in the foot with this one because they taught us to be afraid of all things satanic. They taught us to be afraid of, you know, principalities and powers and all of this. And now they're going to bring all of this into our midst and tell us that we need to be happy because Jesus is coming back and it's going to solve all of these world's problems. Well, yeah, it's going to solve the world's problems because we're not going to be there to watch the world crumble.
Right.
It doesn't solve the world's problems. All it does is creates more panic, more fear, and it provides an all too effective vehicle to keep perpetuating the doctrine, and not just about this, because it's just like what they did with my grandmother. She got scared of what she saw in that drama and made a decision based on fear. And a lot of people make their decisions to follow Christ based on fear because they don't want to go to hell. But it doesn't take long before their rational mind starts realizing, you know what? This really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's where the whole concept of discipleship comes in. Keep them coming back.
Right.
Keep them, and, you know, even the evangelicals in the 80s did a pretty good job of keeping a lot of this stuff in the public eye. Yeah. It wasn't just in our little cloisters. It wasn't just in evangelical circles and all of the little microcultures that crop up around this. It really made its way into the mainstream.
Right.
The 88 reasons why the rapture will be in 88.
Yeah.
That was a mainstream thing. It made international news.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, this guy, he knew how to market it.
Yeah.
But he really didn't take a whole lot of the fine details into consideration, did he?
This little book is dense. It's not very long. It's about 52 pages long. But it is dense. It's full of references. It's full of words. A lot of words. And I was looking at it because
You heard the dog's opinion.
Yeah, right. Snore. I did not read it when it came out. I didn't even hear about it. I was already in college. I didn't watch the news. I also, I was not really exposed to this because I wasn't exposed to this at church. So this was like, when people started talking about it, it was near like Rosh Hashanah, when that was supposed to happen, when the rapture was supposed to take place.
Yeah. And
I remember I was just minding my own business, going about my day, going on a date somewhere. And my friends were all like, oh my God, and everything. They were all scared. And there was stairwells on the ends of the dormitories where people would gather to pray. And they were full. And I'm here. I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just glad I didn't read it because then I'd be scared too. But I'm pretty sure that this is all BS.
Now, you did some research on this guy and the book. So tell us a little bit about that.
I know that one of the first reasons that he cites, reason 2 is discussing the idea of no man would know the day or hour.
Right.
and talking about the word that they used and how that word was slightly different than another word. This version of the word to know means that it'll take effort to know when the day or hour is. And I'm like,
So
okay,
it's basically the equivalent of you're not just going to know. You
right.
got to
You
figure it
got to
out.
figure it out. So it's
Whatever.
like, I'm like, dude, what makes you think that no one else has thought of this before? I've read other diatribes like this, and they all sound about the same, but they're just trying to say, yes, no man knows the day or hour, but I know. It's always that way.
Of
But I
course.
know because my learnings.
Yeah, because I put the effort in and nobody else did.
Yeah, but they all did. They're all poring over the Bible with a fine-toothed comb looking for stuff.
Seek and you shall find.
Yeah, of
See
course.
that, and you know what?
But you can look into the Bible and find anything you want.
Precisely. That's precisely what I was going to say. You can take any verse and make it mean anything that you want by simply placing it into a specific context.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's why you have thousands and thousands and thousands of different sects of Christianity.
Right.
Because everyone looks at those words and they interpret them their own way.
Right.
Just like you should with any novel.
Right. It's funny because, like, a lot of the differences between these different sects are just like a word. They disagree on one word.
Well, they almost took down the Council of Nicaea with filioque.
Yes.
I mean,
And that split the church in two.
yeah.
And it's like, this is crazy. And that's not even in the Bible. Filioque is in the Creed.
Right.
So-
it's in the Nicene Creed.
Right.
So they're arguing their own argument.
Right.
There were people who just weren't filioque about filioque.
Right. Exactly. I find it really dense and kind of incomprehensible because my brain does not work reading this type of thing anymore.
Right.
My brain just sort of goes, no, I thought we were done.
Oh, it's never done with these people.
Well, no, but I was like, oh, now I can read true things. Why would you want to read this?
Well, true things in terms of what?
In terms of science and
Well,
like
yeah.
real things.
Yeah,
but
obviously.
this is a lot. And, reason 8 is like talking about the foundation of the state of Israel in 1948 to
Right.
88 and how it's 40 years and 40 years is a biblical generation.
Right.
And then they talk about the significance of 40 all through the Bible. And it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. But 40 days is just sort of their idea of a long time.
You know what it is? It's a literary device.
Right.
That's all it is.
Right. That's 40, 40 years is like a thing. 40 days and 40 nights, 40 years in the wilderness.
It's an idiomatic expression
Right.
that is used to convey that it's been a while.
It's been a while.
That's it.
Yes.
That's all it's ever been.
And reading a few of these reasons in the 88 reasons, it does seem a little silly and like he's protesting too much.
But you know why there are so many words? I can tell you precisely why it takes him so many words to go through all this shit.
Right.
Because people are going to look at this document. They're going to see this is a little bit too heady for me. This guy has obviously done the research. He knows what he's talking about. And this brick of text in their minds just equals authority.
Right.
So I don't know if too many people ever even cracked open the book.
Yes.
They just decided they were going to believe it. They maybe cracked open the book and saw what was in it and decided, okay, well, you know what? This guy's thought about this a whole lot more than I have. He's probably right.
Right.
So,
But-
and that's not just evangelicals.
No.
People in general do this because I know as a professional copywriter, there are certain things that I need to do with that text to make sure that people see what I want them to see.
Right.
Otherwise, they're just not going to see it. They're going to skim. And if they don't see the information that they want immediately, they're just going to move on. So it's not even an evangelical thing. It's a marketing thing,
Right.
just like everything else in evangelical Christianity.
Right. I remember passing by the thing and being kind of embarrassed that I didn't believe it, but at the same time being relieved because I hadn't even read the book. And I was like, I'm going out on a date. And I remember just going to sleep and waking up and everybody else waking up. I guess it didn't happen. So,
Yeah.
of course, the guy came out with another book, 89 Reasons.
Yeah, because he decided that there was something off with his math in some place or something.
Yeah, it's like the 89th reason was I forgot to carry a 2. I have no idea.
It was something kind of simple like that.
Right.
Where it's like, oops, I goofed. I'm so sorry that I whipped you all into a frenzy last year. Just sort of sit back and wait until whatever date it was, September or whatever, in 89. Now it's going to happen in 89.
Right.
Well, and I'm thinking to myself, well, at least I'll have been to college.
Right.
Still wouldn't have had sex, but I would have gotten to college.
Great.
You know, I would have gotten one more step into life before it was just taken from me.
Yeah. But all these guys seem to have, made a mistake times. Like the Darbyites had their great disappointment.
Right. But those things are necessary to perpetuate the myth.
Right.
You know, I've said many times before that it can be very disarming for somebody to simply say, okay, no excuses, I was wrong.
Right.
Because you expect there to be a defense. When you lead with, I was wrong, period, end of story, people are going to be a lot more prone to listen to you. So that's what this guy did. He's like, look, I was wrong. And I'm sorry. And here's what I've learned since.
Right.
And now it just churns the whole thing up again because now all of a sudden he's an authority again. Well, he made a mistake. He's human. He made a mistake. That doesn't mean that the rest of this isn't right.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right. Yeah, that is the problem. I know that the Darbyites had at least 3 or 4 dates before they finally just gave up on predicting when the rapture was going to happen.
Oh, yeah. There have been predictions as far back as 500 CE.
Right. And, everybody was really, really convinced that 666 was going to be the year that Christ came back.
Right.
Just because of the year. But yeah.
I got some stuff up about all the predictions. So let's see what was happening around the time that Darby was doing his thing. Okay, so there were predictions. I'm looking past 1830, but there were a bunch before 500 CE, 1260 CE, 1673 CE, 1694 CE. It just keeps going and going. So we've got predictions. One by John Wesley in 1836, the founder of the Methodist Church, and this is from the Wikipedia page. The founder of the Methodist Church foresaw the millennium beginning the year 1836. He wrote that Revelation 12:14 referred to the years 1058 to 1836, quote, when Christ should come. So between 1058 and 1836, I guess the point that we're making here is that we're now at the end of the line and it has to happen.
Right.
I mean, he had all this time because it could have happened at any time between this year and this year. Well, we are at this year, so and I guess it just has to happen now. So that's what I read from that.
Yeah.
Let's see. We've got 1861, 1863, 1874, 1890, 1891. Joseph Smith, head of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a.k.a. the Mormons. He had his own prediction in 1891. 1901, the Catholic Apostolic Church. The church founded in 1831, not the Roman Catholic Church. Oh. This church was founded in 1831, and to me, that date's a little suspect. Claimed that Jesus would return by the time the last of its 12 founding members died. This, I'm certain, goes back to that verse about some of you won't taste death before you see the Son of Man come. I feel like this kind of used that as its basis and said, okay, well, this is going to happen before the last of these dudes dies. 1914, the Jehovah's Witnesses had their own proclamation about a second coming. Then you've got the Unification Church, Reverend Sun Myung Moon. 1917-ish is when this started, somewhere between 1917 and 1930.
Right.
Is when all of his stuff started becoming popular, but the Unification Church went on much longer.
Yes.
And I think it probably is still out there.
It's still out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Herbert W. Armstrong, this is another name that means something to me, and he was active in the 70s.
Yes.
He was the founder of the Worldwide Church of God. Mm-hmm. And his entire ministry was founded on prophecies in politics and end time stuff and whatnot. And he and his organization had been debunked.
Yes.
They were a fraudulent organization, and it kind of bothered my mother and me because we liked him.
Yeah.
He was very charismatic. Herbert Armstrong was very, very charismatic, and he was easy to believe. And that's the perfect storm right there, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's see, who else? Don't want to get into the 90s and 2000s, but just for the sake of example, to show you that this is still going on. It may not have the impact, but it is still going on. A couple of years ago, I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. But 1988 was 88 Reasons. That was Edgar C. Whisenant.
Yep.
Then you had Harold Camping in 1994. I remember this one
Yes.
pretty well, too. He was general manager of Family Radio.
Yep.
And he was a Bible teacher. And he published a book called 1994 ? And predicted that Christ would return at some point in 1994. He was a little non-committal.
Yeah.
But he said that it was going to happen that year. Jerry Falwell has made his own predictions. He predicted in 1999 that the second coming would probably be within 10 years. And I heard that a lot in the 80s too, that we probably
Yeah.
wouldn't make it through the decade. So every decade, there's a new prediction. Every time you turn over a decade or a century or a millennium, these things start to crop up. And case in point, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 examples right here on this one page of predictions about the end coming in the year 2000.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Okay?
yeah.
There were, and I'm sorry, there were way, way more than 4.
Oh, yeah.
These are just the ones that people decided to plug in on Wikipedia. And honestly, this was not that long ago. I'm looking at these, and they all, I'm pretty sure I've heard of all of them.
Yeah.
And then going even further in time, 2012, Jack Van Imp decided
Yes.
that he was going to take a shot at this. He's done it before.
Oh, yeah.
This was nowhere near the first time that he came out with some kind of a prediction, but he pointed to 2012 as a possible date for the second coming. Well, so is 2013. So is 4499.
Yes.
I mean, how far are you going to go with this?
Yeah.
They've started making liberal use of words like probably and maybe,
Yeah.
because they're starting to understand that they can't put their eggs all in one basket. I'm certain that there were a few, probably more than a few people, who gave up on their faith when that whole debacle took place. Maybe got a little bit of a re-churning up with it when they found out that the guy admitted he was wrong and said, okay, then now it's going to happen in 89. But I still think that these sorts of things, when you are that specific and it doesn't happen, it can actually be good for our cause, because the more rational thinking people out there will start realizing, okay, look, these people did a lot of research on this. They thought they had it figured out. It's been 2,000 years. Where is he?
Yeah.
And, someone tried to answer that question. They were wrong. Is it ever going to happen? I mean,
Right.
remember that Charlie Peacock song, Dear Friend?
Yes.
That was,
Yeah.
it was about not losing hope that Jesus was going to come back.
Right.
And it was done in the form of a woman waiting for her fiance, who has been gone a long time, to come back and marry her. And it's what the Assemblies refers to as the blessed hope, that Jesus will return for his bride, which is his church,
Right.
and take them back to heaven. And back in the day, I loved that song. I
Right.
used that song in altar calls. Okay, I used that song in various settings to give people hope. I used to do this one talk a lot on the Vida Nueva weekends called Confidence in Christ. It was the last one. It was the most motivational. I was pretty charismatic, so I was asked to do it a lot.
Yeah.
And I would always incorporate the song Dear Friend by Charlie Peacock into that.
Yeah.
Because what other song out there at that time was so in step with the notion of just keep waiting?
Right.
It really is the heart of their messaging.
Right.
When it comes to end time stuff, it's just keep waiting. But there are problems. There are some real serious problems with thinking like that. And I was brainstorming some of them. Now, we brought up one of them already, where it's the notion of for such a time as you think not. And this goes back to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, just two verses that that bookend a couple of other ideas here. So before you tell me I'm taking it out of context, I'm going to tell you, read this entire thing, because these two verses kind of bookend it, but they're important verses. They're very important verses if you are dead set on believing that this doctrine is true. This is Matthew 24, starting at verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man. This is in the context of the lesson of the fig tree. Let me actually start with that, because this is it's significant. Matthew 24, starting at verse 32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, yet ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when ye shall see all of these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. For verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Now, in mission circles, this was a point of contention, because what it's saying, and there's also another verse that's coming to my mind, but I don't remember what the reference is, where it says that the gospel will be preached to every people and every tribe and everything, and then the end will come. Right. This was kind of a precursor to that, and it conveys the same point. Now, what was one thing that they taught us about exegesis is that you need more than one verse. But if you've got two verses that complement each other, you can probably find truth in it.
Right.
Okay. So, and truth in a specific concept, not just the words, because the words are supposed to be all true, but confidence that you are correct in a certain assumption about something, because there are multiple verses about it. Well, you've got this passage in the Gospels, and then you've got it again in the epistles. So that for a lot of people is enough to say, okay, well, this is a true concept. But here's the problem. If you look at it from the standpoint of evangelism, and you look at it from the standpoint of the Great Commission, this world is nowhere near ready to receive Christ, because everyone is supposed to hear the gospel beforehand. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how they managed to pull that off with people being born and dying every single day. Right. They never get into that. Mm-hmm. But the point is, I think that the gospel message is supposed to be preached all over the world. Well, it's been 2,000 years, and more than 2/3 of the world has still never heard of Jesus. In a world where you can take a plane anywhere, in a world where you can broadcast a signal into anywhere, and in a world where people literally carry the knowledge of the ages in their pockets, 2/3 of the world has still never heard of him. Yeah. 2,000 years, and we're supposed to believe that the apostles covered all of this ground in a matter of just a few years before they were all martyred.
Right.
We're supposed to believe that they did all this, and yet 2,000 years later, with the help of mass communication and the information superhighway, we haven't been able to do it yet. Mm. And to me, that says that we don't even live in a world. If I still believed in this stuff, and it was an argument that I would make all the time, and an argument that I made over the whole 88 Reasons thing. Right. It's like, well, my Bible says that this gospel will be preached to every tongue, nation, and tribe and people, and then the end will come. Well, has that happened? Well, then why are we waiting for this? It can't possibly be true. Mm. But it's amazing how easy it is to shove certain details onto the back burner when they don't jibe with what you want to believe at that moment.
Right. Yeah.
And it's that way with a lot of things. It's that way when people who are evangelical Christians divorce and they decide they want to be remarried. Well, the Bible is very clear that if you remarry and your spouse is still alive, then you're living in adultery.
Right.
But I know a lot of born-again Christians that have been divorced and remarried, my mother included, who knew that verse full well, whose husband knew that verse full well, and the pastor who married them knew the verse full well and married them anyway. Why? Because deep down, they all know. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. Deep down, they all know. And then you start making excuses. Well, honestly, I just don't think that a loving God would want me to be alone and unhappy. And you know what? Neither do I.
Yeah.
A loving God wouldn't. Yours absolutely does. Yeah. I'm just saying. Mm. But let me get a little bit more into this. Again, I said there were two verses that bookended. It's verse 36 and verse 44 of the same chapter. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So I don't even care what you're going to say after that. if you're going to write a book that says, I know, these words tell me that you don't. You can play the word game with the translations, and in certain translations, this word means this. It doesn't matter. There are some things in the Bible that are very mysterious, and there are some things that are very black and white. And some of these statements that were made were very, very black and white. And even as I read them now, I sit here wondering how they intended to get out of it when these things didn't happen. There just doesn't seem to be a backdoor or an end game here. They just tell you these things and ignore it when it doesn't happen. Or from the other side of the coin, they read these things, decide it doesn't matter, and say, okay, well, you should listen to me anyway. Yeah. And then come up with some lame-ass excuse about the word no.
Yeah.
Come on. Mm-hmm. And the other one, the other verse here says, therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. I would really love to know how our friend Edgar C. Wisenant got around that one. I'd love to know, because he came up with his excuse about no man knowing.
Right.
But what about this whole business of at such a time as you think not? So if the whole world knows, didn't you just put it off?
Yeah.
I mean, if it was supposed to happen, didn't you just put it off by telling the whole fucking world about it?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. But I think that certain people and certain groups and certain circles started understanding along the way that you couldn't be that specific.
Right.
Okay. Around the same time that the whole 88 Reasons debacle was going on, we started, at least I, in the circles that I was in, started hearing a whole lot more about the doctrine of imminence.
Yeah.
And the Assemblies of God wanted us to keep in mind that the concept of imminence meant being ready all the time. And there are plenty of verses about that too, particularly in Revelation, that tell us to watch and pray.
Right.
Okay, so I'm watching and praying for something that I'm not going to expect, because it's going to happen at such a time as I think not. So now I'm watching and praying for what exactly?
Right.
So many contradictions and so much back and forth on this particular subject. Anyone who takes a few minutes to think about it, like you're doing right now, should be able to see just how ridiculous it is.
Right.
You know, this should not still be a point of fear for anybody.
No.
Because it's a circus. When you look just at that one Wikipedia page, go and look at all the resources that are there, go and look at all the source material, it's a circus. And there's never any logic, reason, or science behind it. It's one person with an opinion that spreads that opinion because he has the charisma to do it.
Right.
And that's it. Mm-hmm. As I said, there are a few problems here, and I want to go through a couple more, but I don't want to neglect my co-host. Do you have anything you want to interject here?
The idea of being watchful and praying is kind of ridiculous when you think of the whole notion of insecurity that they also cultivate in you about your salvation. Like, you do something wrong, you could lose your salvation.
Oh, yeah, but it depends on what organization. The Baptists will tell you that that's not a thing.
Right.
But in assembly circles where we spent most of our time,
it was always, are you sure? Are you certain?
Yeshua? You betcha.
Oh, God. And are you sure you're certain? It's like constant.
I've seen youth meetings that started out that way.
Yes.
Are you sure? We're sure. Are you certain? We're certain. Are you certain you're certain?
Yep.
It was one of those, like, God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. They started out a lot of meetings with that one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a kid and as an adult on a Bible school campus, it's a recipe for constant anxiety.
Do you have any specific stories, things that you saw aside from that one time in the stairwell?
That was the one thing. That was the biggest thing that I remember, was all these people saying, you know, I'm not sure if this is correct, but I want to be waiting and praying just in case it is.
The whole Pascal's wager thing.
Right. And it's
just applied to a slightly different part of doctrine. That's all.
Right. It's like, I just don't want to waste my Saturday. I'm sorry. And I couldn't even take it seriously because I'm like, what's it going to be next year? I was already thinking, what's it going to be next year? 89 Reasons?
Right. If this was
And
88,
it was.
if this was 88, I kind of love that you were going out on a date. It wasn't with me because I didn't know you.
No.
I love that you went out on a date when Jesus was supposed to be coming back.
Yeah, because neither one of us had even heard of this book. It wasn't exactly a school text. And I wasn't really paying attention to the wider church world because all of my church experience was like one particular church. And if that one particular church didn't have people who were talking about this all the time, then how am I supposed to know? I had a little television in my room. I didn't watch religious programs.
I remember seeing it on the news. I do recall that, but it was like the day before.
Yeah.
Like
and
it
was
didn't really get a whole lot of press until the event was supposed to happen.
Right.
And then
By the
press
way.
yeah, and then the press and media were interested.
And it's like that verse always came to me. It's like no man knows the day or hour. And at a time when you don't think it's going to happen, that's when it'll happen.
Right.
So I'm like, why should I worry about this?
So you know what? Just inject all that thinking into your doctrine so that you can, I don't know, keep your Savior from coming back. Just keep
Live
people
life.
thinking about it. You want to just not have this happen. Just have people thinking about, oh, today I could be raptured.
Yeah.
And let 1 million people a day think today I could be raptured. It's not going to happen because no man knows the day or the hour. And it's going to happen at such a time as you think not.
Right. I didn't take it seriously because I didn't even know about it. Nobody was talking about it in classes because I don't think they believed it and they didn't want their whole populace getting more nervous than they already were.
It was a real polarization. Either people believed this like with their whole heart or they rejected it outright. There was very, very little middle ground. I think I was more of a middle grounder only because I said, and I remember saying, so the same friend who put that whole worm in my ear about Satan living in my house.
Oh, God.
You know what he said to me the night before that was supposed to happen?
What?
We're leaving school and he says, see you tomorrow in the air.
Oh, God. Oh, wow.
Same kid.
Oh, my God.
That put that in my head. And the only reason that I would say I was in the middle, since I cut myself off, the only reason that I said that is because I already believed in imminence and I believed that it could happen at any time.
Right.
But if it happened on this timeline, it was coincidental. There are other problems. There are other problems with this. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go through these quickly. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to go too much further into this because, like with anything else, there are details about this that work well with other subjects that I want to bring up later. So I don't want to do this comprehensive thing and then wind up just repeating information in later shows. So I want to make sure that we stay on point with this. There are other problems, and I'm going to go through these quickly. We already talked about the verses in Matthew. There's another verse in Thessalonians that they like to use as proof that this thing is going to happen. And it says in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17, reading from the King James Version, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." Okay, anyone see a problem here? Let's read what the verse says. "Then we, which are alive and remain, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord." When do I get to go to heaven? I mean, the verse doesn't say anything about us being taken to heaven.
Nope.
It says that we're going to be caught up together in the clouds, and there we will ever be with the Lord. So what are we going to do? Just sort of float around and watch the world burn? It's also a very dead-end kind of passage. And it's another one of those problems that they used to warn us about in exegesis is dead-end concepts.
Right.
Now, of course, the return of Christ comes back around in Revelation. It is mentioned a few times in the epistles. So it was a widely held belief at that point. Why they still believed it after being told that some people who were standing in Jesus's presence would not taste death before he came back. Why this was still a thing even while the rest of these texts were being written is beyond me. But you know what? Maybe Revelation, and this is pure speculation. I have no proof or research on this. But maybe Revelation came around to kind of divert attention away from some of those smaller details. I think that it's more than possible that this book was inserted, and I'm certain that it was written by someone who was not at the Council of Nicaea. I don't think that it was written to be part of this so that they would have some place to go with verses like this. I just think that it was fortunate happenstance that some crackpot who was smoked up on something. That's the only thing I can think of. Either he was shrooming big time or there was something else going on. I'm certain that someone actually wrote this and believed that they saw all of it.
Right.
Because when I read the book of Revelation now, I mean, it really just reads like a huge acid trip.
Yeah.
And that could very well have been what it was. It could have been the product of something like that. I mean, look at what Lewis Carroll came up with while he was tripping on acid.
Well, there you go.
Some really, really cool stories. And, you read through the book of Revelation and it's like, yeah, cool story, bro. But there's really not a whole lot here that jibes with anything else in the book.
No.
It's very disjointed. None of the things that they talk about in that book really tie into anything else. So the entire book of Revelation is kind of dead end.
Yeah.
It really is. And it really makes a person wonder why it's in there and why it's at the very end of the book. Because you would think that if there was this sense of urgency and imminence to the return of Christ, we would want to know about it sooner.
Right.
We wouldn't want to get through all of the epistles and all the rest of the New Testament to get to this. We would want to know about it right away. But there's something about the book of Revelation that has always struck me as being a little bit off. Even when I was mired in the Kool-Aid,
Right.
I read this stuff and it's like, this just reads like this dude really thought he saw all this, and not from a cultural perspective. There are all kinds of things like, okay, well, they didn't know what helicopters were. So as far as John the Revelator was concerned, they looked like huge locusts, basically. So, but they were helicopters. And then the whole thing with Chernobyl, a star falling from the sky and into the earth. The smallest star out there would consume the earth from, not terribly far away. But, our sun, where it is right now, is in the prime location for us to sustain life. If the planet ever got knocked out of orbit, some bad things could happen. Okay? So with this whole notion of a star falling to the earth, all scripture is God breathed, isn't it? So your God doesn't understand that stars are bigger than planets? That every star is bigger than every planet that we know of? I mean, God wrote the book, right? And he knows nothing about astronomy.
Yeah.
And he knows nothing about physics. And he knows nothing about writing good literature.
No, evidently not.
There are many, many, many problems here.
Yes.
And I've got just a couple more that I want to go through. Let's just start with the fact that no one's been right. Okay? I brought this up a little bit ago, but I just want to say a little bit more about it now. What does that tell you? If you're still on the fence about this, it's been 2,000 years. It's time to let this one go.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All religions have shelf lives. I have no clue how this particular one has managed to go on and on and on and on and on the way that it has, when the whole idea of the return of Christ has to be founded on a lie. It has to be. Because when I read my Bible, I hear that Jesus was supposed to come back right away. Okay? So either he was lying, or he just had no fucking clue and was just saying stuff so that people would continue listening to him. But the simple fact that we've gone 2,000 years
Yeah.
and have not seen hide nor hair of him should be enough for any rational person to look at that and say, maybe there are some flaws in the doctrine of this religion.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something just not quite right here, and just take it from there. Let those seeds germinate, because there's substance to them. There's good fruit that's going to come out of them. Next problem that I have, and this is my problem with anything that you try to use the Bible as a proof to your argument. And I'm going to tell you the same thing about end times prophecies and all of that I will tell you about any other concept in that book that you try to throw at me. No science, no argument.
Yeah.
There is no argument good enough in the Bible to tell me that there's any reason why I should be waiting for anyone to return. And there's no evidence that he was ever here in the first place.
Right.
I mean, most people don't realize this, but there isn't a single historian from the time that Jesus was supposed to be on this planet who ever had word one to say about him. There's one source and one source only, and that's the Bible. Anything that came after the church fathers, Josephus, who has also been proven to be a fraud, but any of the church fathers that talked about him, these things all came later.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no basis of argument to any part of this. There's no scientific explanation for why a rapture would happen. It defies all manner of physics. Since I've never seen anything happen that defies known physics, except for maybe a bumblebee, which they say does. I've seen bumblebees flying. If I'm going to turn into a bumblebee and go to heaven, then I guess maybe there's something to it. But no, there's absolutely no proof. Absolutely no proof whatsoever that anything that these people believe could ever possibly happen. And that's another thing. Another huge one for me. This sort of thinking and perpetuating this sort of thinking and trying to get other people to believe it does nothing but lead to panic.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of panic around the 88 Reasons.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? People weren't happy. People were not looking forward to this. We talked about it. You know, teenage girls worrying that they're going to be raptured before they get to have sex. I mean,
Yeah.
For some of these people, I knew them pretty well, and I think it was kind of tongue-in-cheek also.
Yeah.
So not really a worry or a panic, but, you know, I wanted to bring this up because it's not really panic, but it's along the same lines. So I spoke a bunch of episodes ago about the first church that I experienced with my mother that was outside of the Catholic Church, that was definitely evangelical and was populated by people from the Tres Dias community. Well, one of those people was somebody that my mother was really friendly with, and I liked her a lot too. And over the course of events, she met this guy, and they got married and started filling their quiver. And my mother, I never saw this firsthand, but my mother had gone to their house several times. She didn't know the husband that well, but he was a good guy. I remember him. They were both good people, but they were really, really, really mired in the Kool-Aid. They were very, very, very mired. They were good people, but they just had some crazy ideas. And when you looked around their house, everything was in disrepair. Things were literally falling apart in their house. And they didn't seem like they were embarrassed by it. But I remember my mother saying that her friend pulled her aside at one point and said, you know, I guess maybe she was kind of looking around at stuff and saying, oh my goodness, you know, you don't always have a great poker face in those situations. So I'm guessing that she saw something in my mom's face and pulled her aside and said, you know, I know what it looks like, but we just don't see the point in doing anything with this because Jesus is going to be back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I saw that a lot.
Yeah.
I saw people neglecting their homes. I saw people neglecting themselves. I saw people just, and this is supposed to be our blessed hope. Everything that I saw pointed to a sense of hopelessness, that it's like your house is a reflection of what is going on in your head. You and I know this.
Yeah.
Okay? Your house is a reflection of what is going on in your mind. And in their mind, Jesus was coming back, so none of this mattered.
Yeah.
And that's very, very scary. Let's not talk so much about panic. Let's talk about those individual situations where people are banking their very existences on something that springs forth from a work of fiction. And it's very sad.
Yeah.
I don't even want to say scary. I say the word scary too much. I find this particular one sad, where you choose to live in squalor because Jesus is coming back, so what's the point? I mean, that to me does not sound like a blessed hope. It sounds like blessed hopelessness.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus is coming back, so why does any of this matter? And when you start thinking about life that way, then it's difficult to start seeing the good in anything. So now you become the bride in Dear Friend, where you're sitting there and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for this thing to happen. And while you're waiting, life is passing you by.
Yep.
And that's the real danger there. These are thoughts that keep people in bondage. They keep them going back to church. They keep them in this perpetual state of hope where maybe being raptured will be the thing that makes my situation better. You see, there's the other side of the coin. You've got the ones who are young and their lives are just beginning and they don't want this to happen. And then you've got the people who have experienced a little bit of life and this is how they look at their existence. It's like, can Jesus just come back now? I've had enough of this.
Yeah.
I don't see any hope in any of that.
No.
And yet this is supposed to be our blessed hope. Where is the hope in it? It seems like this is, it almost feels like spiritual suicide.
Yeah.
It really does. It feels to me like this sense of looming hopelessness, like nothing matters because the world and all of its ways and all of its people and all of its everything are going to pass away. So why should I even work on me when I'm going to get a new me?
Yeah.
You know, why do I need to work on and resolve issues surrounding my mental illness? I'm going to get a new mind and I'm going to have clear thoughts and it's going to be wonderful. And all of these things that they believe will happen if Jesus would just come the fuck back already.
Yeah.
And I talked just, this was the thing I kind of jumped the gun on it. Apathy and indifference to the physical world. Well, those people's house was a prime example of this. And I heard a lot of different messages in sermons about, you know, how this world is passing away, not to worry about, you know, certain things that, you know, most of us would consider to be fundamental.
Right.
But we weren't supposed to worry about them because at the end of the day, it was all meaningless because the world was just going to pass away and heaven would be it. There would be a new heavens and a new earth, but there are so many arguments as to what these things are, what they mean, what was actually being spoken about. I don't think there's anybody out there that really believes that the planet is just going to go foof and a new one's going to appear.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone out there that thinks that. But no, there may be some. I'm not going to talk for everybody. There may be some out there. You're wrong, but that's fine. But the whole apathy and indifference to the physical world thing, it goes way beyond someone not painting their house. And
Right.
when you're indifferent to your world, how can you care about yourself?
Right.
People just stop caring about themselves. But, you know, that's part of the process here too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I must decrease so Christ can increase.
Right.
It is no longer I that liveth, but Christ who liveth within me. I am crucified with Christ.
Yeah.
Okay. Just the sheer imagery in those verses alone and what it means and what it does to you mentally and emotionally. And then you add in the blessed hope. And there are too many people out there just sitting there hoping that it happens because they are dissatisfied with their lives, or they're depressed, or there are other things, or they're lonely, or whatever. And now the end game is just let this life end and let something better start.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. And this is my little end pep talk here. Okay. How about this? How about just make it 1 for 2? Your life doesn't have to end for something better to start. If this kind of thinking, if this is what this kind of thinking does to you, imagine just for a minute if those thoughts weren't in your head anymore. Imagine if you didn't feel like you needed to believe something anymore. Imagine if you weren't just sitting around waiting for some external force to solve all your problems. Let me make this abundantly crystal clear. Jesus is never coming back. Let me say it again. Jesus is never coming back. How do I know this? He would have had to be here in the first place. And if by some chance there was some dude walking around Palestine then and doing the things that are purported to have been Jesus doing, I have no problem with the idea that there were a few crackpots out there that were rousing the rabble. If Jesus was a real person, however, all I can say is that his story got just a little inflated over time. But what if, and let's just think about this really, really, really seriously for a second. What if you didn't need to cling to this blessed hope to have a happy existence? Read your Bible. Read up on what waits for you in heaven. We've talked about this before. You're buying yourself an eternity of subservience and nothing more. I mean, they do a stellar job of marketing certain things in the Bible. Why this existence, this eternal, never-ending existence where you're doing nothing but worshiping a malcontent deity is something that I should aspire to or want is completely beyond me. If that is the most blessed of hopes that your religion can offer you, what is it worth? Either you can be subservient in heaven or you can be subservient in hell. What an option. What great choices we've been given. So as a closing thought, I want you to just take a little bit of time and think about this whole situation, this whole issue from the standpoint of reason and logic just for a couple seconds. Let's forget what the Bible says about anything, because anything it has to say about this is very disjointed to begin with. And let's just think about whether or not any of this makes sense. Does it make more sense to sit there looking out your window waiting for the bridegroom to come, or just getting up off your ass and doing something with your life? Because, I'll say it again, Jesus is never coming back. And once we get comfortable with that notion, as people who are in this religion or coming out of it or have been out of it and are angry at the things that we once believed, get comfortable with this. Get comfortable with the notion that 2,000 years is too long for anyone to keep a promise. Get comfortable with the idea that you've got a lot of years ahead of you here, that you don't have to look over your shoulder for your Savior to come, that you don't have to be waiting in blessed hope of this imminent thing that is just never going to happen. Stop thinking about what's going to happen after you die. You've got right now to work with. Work with it. Do something good with it. Stop thinking about whether or not tomorrow's going to be the day that your Savior comes to get you. He's not. You have a life to live, and you have a set number of days to live it. How do you want to spend those days? Worrying about whether or not your religion is real? Or just looking at this one concept from the standpoint of logic, realizing just how completely batshit it is, and letting yourself stop believing it. Just let yourself stop believing in this. Just this one thing. Realize the logic behind your disbelief in it. Realize the lack of logic in continuing to believe in it. Let your brain and your emotions have a break. Start living your life. Live it on your terms. Live as though Christ never came and Christ will never come again, because that's the reality of your situation. What was the old cliche? Live each day as if Jesus died today, died yesterday, rose today, and will come again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Is that how it goes?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm pretty sure it is.
So let me give you my own version. Live each day understanding that Jesus was never here in the first place, never rose from the dead, and is never coming back. Because it's a lot easier to believe that than it is to just keep looking out your window, waiting for the clouds to part.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to just say, you know what, this makes no sense at all. It's been 2,000 years. I can't do this anymore. So you know what? Start making some stuff happen. Start with your mind. Start making some good things happen there. Then start making some good things happen in your life and in your world. Be involved in your own life. And start getting unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.